When your mind is in a state of autopilot, it's hard to think and focus on any given thing. You're just a passenger along for the ride, your body operating based solely on muscle memory and habits etched into your mind. I wake up, I get coffee, I drop my daughter off, go to work, and then go home. Lily would always be home by the time I came back, having made dinner for herself. I'd talk to her about her day, she'd ask about mine, and then I'd begin working once again. Rinse, wash, repeat. The only day that didn't happen was Tuesday. Lily had chess club that day, meaning she would stay at school for 1, sometimes 2 hours longer than normal. That meant I'd be able to pick her up since the end of her club aligned with the end of my work. Her dull eyes, staring uselessly at the sky, would instantly brighten the moment they landed upon me. She'd jump into the passenger seat, just barely having reached the age of being allowed to do so. "Daddy," she would always greet me like that, and I would ruffle her dark hair, much to her dismay. I would barely get a word in as she recounted every minute detail of her day, from the color of the crayon she used to draw a duck, to what flavor juice she drank for her snack break, and how many people she beat in chess. "Did you have a good day, Dad?" Lily would then ask once she was finished talking about hers. I'd always responded with the same thing. It was good. That would be all she needed to prompt her into another topic of conversation. We talked the entire drive home, and by the time we pulled into the driveway, her mouth would be sore from talking so much. That was how that day was supposed to be, but it was different. Lily was supposed to be waiting near the bus stop like usual. She'd always stand right next to it, waving goodbye to her friends. As they were carted off in the big yellow vehicle, she'd turn her head toward the street, and when she'd see my car pull up, her expression would light up and her smile would stretch off her face. That's how it was supposed to be. That's how it was always supposed to be. Why did she have to change that? Why did she have to run away from the bus stop and down the street, where my car was headed straight for her? I could have braked, but my mind, already worn from sleep and work, was running purely off muscle memory, something that didn't account for my daughter. The sound of a sickening crunch filled the air, followed by the unmistakable noise of a body hitting the front of a car. Immediately, I was shaken back to reality, and before I could even realize what was going on, I jumped out of the car. A bright pink bag lay at my feet, its contents laid out for all to see. Then, I saw the blood trail, and my heart stopped. Lily's broken form lay more than 5 feet in front of the car, splayed out, her arm contorting in ways it shouldn't. I remember shouting her name, nearly stumbling over the bag to reach her. Dizzy steps led me to her side, where I cradled her, her eyes gazing up at the sky lifelessly. I placed my ear near her mouth, waiting for a faint hot breath to graze my skin. When nothing came, I pressed down on her chest, hoping to feel the rise and fall of her lungs. Nothing. The palms of my hands rested on her shoulder, and, with a deep breath, I began the motions I'd learned all those years ago. Each violent push caused her lifeless body to lurch, and each brutal crackle of her ribs threatened to break them. Everything inside of me told me to stop, that I was hurting her. But she couldn't be hurt. If she were hurt, she'd scream. Lily would yell, cry, and complain about the pain. That's what she would do, but she didn't, because Lily couldn't feel a thing. Though the reality had set on me minutes ago, my emotions continued to rock her limp frame. I didn't care if I was sent to jail for such a stupid accident. I didn't care if she despised me. I didn't care. All that mattered was seeing those faint eyes of hers once more, looking up at me. The emotion they carried, whether it be disappointment, joy, anger, or sadness, I wanted to see them all. My arms ached, and I could feel the adrenaline fade. This was a useless endeavor. I had murdered my own daughter because I wasn't paying attention. My precious Lily, the light of my life, the one thing keeping me from ending it all. Gone. Her beautiful dreams would never grace this world. Her talents, her passions, they would all go to waste, because I couldn't keep my eyes on the road. The final push was what broke the camel's back as a disgusting snap echoed from within her chest. But that wasn't the reason I jumped back. It was the gasp that followed, a deep, heaving breath that forced her broken body into a coughing fit. I stared at her in awe, watching the shallow movements of her chest as she struggled to breathe. Her body convulsed and twitched, unable to handle the pain, and yet she was alive. I wrapped my arms around her, careful not to apply too much pressure. That still seemed not to be enough as Lily let out a whine. Lily, you're okay," I whispered, hands racing across her body in an attempt to find a pulse. Thump, thump, thump. Her heart weakly drummed against her chest, barely able to reach her ribs. I closed my fingers around her tiny hand, squeezing it gently, as if to comfort her. Tears streamed down my cheeks as my vision grew blurry. "You're okay, Lily. Daddy's here. You're safe now." My head lifted as I heard the faintest of footsteps. I locked onto the sound like a starving wolf, ready to pounce at any given moment. A woman who I recognized as one of the teachers was approaching her car, having been parked on the other side of the street. "Hey," I yelled out, my voice coming out decibels higher than intended. She flinched, hands instinctively reaching for her bag until she saw the bloodied girl in my arms. "Help, please, help." She immediately rushed over, trying to look over my shoulder and at Lily. "Do you know first aid? Please, you need to help her." Oh my god. "Yes, I do." Is she breathing? In the moment I pulled away from Lily, allowing the woman access, her expression faded. Her mouth, once a gaping thing that couldn't produce any words with stumbling over them, was now a thin, tight line. Her eyes, wide and edging dangerously close to tears, were reduced to narrowed slits. All emotion was sapped, and I could physically see her eyes darken, though I thought this to be a side effect of my blurred vision rather than an actual change in appearance. "Well," I insisted, holding back the urge to grab her and shake her. "Do something." Nothing, not even a blink. Her fingers twitched unnaturally before, without warning, she rushed forward, arms outstretched. Before I could comprehend what was going on, my body reacted, and I scooped Lily up, barely dodging the stranger. "What are you doing?" The woman stumbled forward, stiff movements like watching a poorly animated film. "Return her," the voice commanded through vocal cords not entirely her own. Though it was the same voice, it seemed wrong, like it wasn't the right fit for whatever was using it. "Do not interrupt the cycle. Return her." "No, get away." I stumbled backward, my arms tightening around Lily as I held her away from the woman. Her eyes were completely lifeless, the pupils having gone pitch black. Her fate has been sealed. Let her pass. With each step forward, she matched my pace back. Just as rusty marionette strings pushed her forward for another leap, I dashed into the vehicle. I tossed Lily into the passenger seat, not caring how rough my movements were. As long as she was alive, I would be fine with whatever injuries she sustained. Slamming the door shut, I watched as the woman arose from the ground, head tilting toward me at an angle far too unnatural. She reeled her hand back and slammed it against the glass, fingers splintering, as if she had no care for whatever happened to her body. Before she could attack a second time, I had already sped off, watching as the form of the woman was reduced to nothing more than a speck. My breathing, uneven and labored, was drowned out by the sound of my heartbeat. However, both these things dropped to a complete halt as a wheeze came from the seat beside me. The rare sound of her discomfort was all I needed to keep going. She was alive, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. My constant need to check on her led me to nearly ramming into a car, only missing it by the skin of my teeth. I expected a stream of profanities to leave the windows of the driver, only to be met with nothing. They drove by, glaring right at me with the same hollow eyes the teacher had. "We're almost there, sweetheart," I whispered to the girl, gauging her for a reaction. It was obvious even to me that I was only speaking to her to get my mind off of the teacher. Her actions were completely illogical, and the way she spoke. I was never a superstitious person, but that didn't mean I wasn't open to the idea. The supernatural. Still, the existence of something that defied all science didn't change anything. Lily would survive, the cycle be damned. Just as I was about to take a turn that led to the hospital, the car in front of me stopped. Though I slammed hard on the brakes, I wasn't able to stop the vehicle from colliding into the back. "Damn it," I yelled, punching the wheel. Though it had hurt, I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, numbing the pain. The size differences between the two automobiles meant mine didn't take the brunt of the force. That small victory was taken, as a boot kicked the door open and a man with blood trickling down his face exited. He didn't acknowledge the existence of the wound, however, and was far more focused on staring me down. The moment I saw those hollow, dark eyes, I knew this wasn't a case of road rage. I could hear him chant the same two words the teacher did, but something was different. He wasn't the only voice speaking. Walking down the street, I spotted an elderly woman repeating after him, vocal cords ruined from smoking. And to my right, a mother and a daughter, fingers interlaced, spoke as well. They all spoke in unison, their voices melding together. "Return her." I shifted the gears and slammed the pedal, causing the engine to roar in protest. It lurched forward, and the mob followed. And yet, despite the fact the man was seconds away from being run over, he didn't seem fazed. Instead, he was more concerned with trying to reach out for Lily. Just as the car was about to hit the man, I swerved out of the way, the side of the vehicle scraping against the metal of another. The idea of killing someone, no matter how terrible they were, was too much for me. Those morals, however, were about to be tested. Lily's limp body bounced with each reckless turn, the only thing keeping her from gaining air being my hand pushing down on her, narrowly missing the mother and child, both of whom had no qualms about jumping in front of my car. I cut through the yard. Each attempt I made at sparing the mob's lives only resulted in more obstacles, and soon enough, I couldn't see an inch of pavement and couldn't hear the sound of the engine. Return her. The monotonous tone I grew to fear was replaced with one far worse, not anger nor hatred, desperation. Return her now. My grip on the wheel tightened, my knuckles turning white. Leave us alone, I shouted, knowing it would have little to no effect on the crowd. And I was right. Their march didn't so much as waver, frightening determination fueling their steps. There was no way for me to get past them without hurting them, but that was absolutely out of the question. Right, my eyelids closed as my feet pressed harder on the pedal. Hold on, baby. Things are going to get a little bumpy, so don't open your eyes. Then, the first impact rattled the car. It felt exactly like when I had hit my daughter, with the same jolt of energy and adrenaline. Then came another and another, until I began to mistake the feeling for driving over a speed bump. It helped that no screams came from the husks I was running over, no pleas for help, no cries of agony, nothing, just the same demand. Return her, the repetitive, never-ending, infuriating request for her death. Their chants soon became muffled, their voices drowned out by the loud thuds of their bodies and the squeals of their bones. You do not know what you are doing. A passing voice, one belonging to an elderly woman, cried out, "You are bringing things into existence that should have stayed dormant." A boy pleaded his attempts at keeping up with me only failing. Her death is a mercy to her, yourself. And my fist hit the horn dead on, and the blaring siren shut the voice up. Perhaps their demented chanting continued, but I refused to let them keep me from saving my own daughter. Finally, as the light grew brighter and the rough terrain ceased, I let my eyes slip open. Blood coated the glass, the wear and tear of having body after body slam against the windows causing it to nearly shatter. But through the murky, viscous liquid, I could see the familiar plus symbol that signaled our destination. The moment I was in the parking lot, I stepped on the brakes and threw the door open. The car hadn't even properly come to a halt before I jumped out, reaching for Lily. As I tried to pull her, however, something resisted. It wasn't from Lily herself. Her hands laid limp by her side, offering no obstacle. Another tug resulted in the same outcome. Only when my fingers pried between her back and the seat did I feel her move forward, at the cost of a searing pain shooting up my hand. The sensation felt like millions of boiling needles dug into the tips of my fingers, targeting the nerve endings. Finally, she came free, my arm wrapped around her shoulders, while the other held her legs. Blood dripped from the back of the seat, and when I looked down, the source was clear. Black vines filled out the silhouette of where she was once sat, tips curling infinitely onto each other. The organic matter was shifting, each pulse causing the very air around it to distort, and so much as looking at it sent a feeling most unpleasant to the back of my brain. It was like a headache that was just out of reach, yelling to look away, and that I did, much more concerned about my daughter's back. Charred flesh lined her spine, and from it, the vines sprouted. The scent of something vaguely familiar yet never experienced before filled my lungs, and though the smell was unpleasant, I had no desire to cover my mouth. It was strange, because the longer I stood there, the more comfortable the scent became, and the more my paranoia was soothed. As I approached the imposing building, I quickly realized that it too wasn't safe. This was made evident the moment I stepped inside with Lily draped over my shoulder. The receptionist grabbed the phone with amateurish haste. A marionette, just like all the others. Return her. The order sent every human within the building to drop what they were doing. Patients, doctors, family members, everyone. Every pair of eyes was trained on Lily, their hollow gazes filled with a single thought. They stood, their chairs toppling over as they walked toward me. Doors squeaked open, broken limbs, wheelchairs, and crutches ignored in favor of reaching us. The chants from the mob outside began once more, now leaving the lips of those inside. The blood of however many I killed on my hands. I kicked in the leg of a chair, the piece of wood splintering from the force. The end was sharpened by hundreds of needle-thin pieces, and I figured it would serve as a fine enough weapon. Searching for an exit, I spotted one not protected by any able-bodied people and started running. Though outnumbered, I was able to make it through anyone in my path fairly easily. Their attempts at stopping me were weak, uncoordinated, and sometimes used limbs that were broken. I slammed the wood into their jaws, the force sending them back, burying the sharp end of the makeshift weapon into the chest of a security guard. I ran down the hallway, leaving them in my wake. I didn't know where I was going. Even if I found a room, there were no doctors who would operate on her. They were too busy trying to stop me. But the longer we were stuck here, the more time we lost. Every second that ticked by was another closer to her demise. So, as my feet pounded against the floor, I realized the voices grew distant, and the only ones I could hear were the pained whimpers coming from my daughter. She was dying. My Lily was dying. Tears began to fill my vision, blurring my surroundings. I stopped moments before I collided with a wall, realizing I had encountered a dead end, with nowhere left to turn to, and the looming threat of the mob breathing on my neck. I stumbled into an empty operating room. Machines attached to countless wires, some translucent and some not, lined the walls. One bed was in the center, the thin, plastic cover laid out for the patient that used to reside there. It wouldn't surprise me if the last occupant had left not more than a few minutes ago. I draped her broken form and laid the blanket over her, trying to ignore it as the cloth turned a crimson so dark I almost mistook it for black, and pushed several desks to block the door. "It's okay," I whispered, gently brushing aside the stray strands of hair that were glued to her forehead. My voice was trembling, and it was hard to get out the words. "You're going to be okay. I don't know what to do, Lily." My voice broke, and I cursed myself for failing as a father. My child should never see me cry, especially not at a time like this. But the tears didn't stop. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Honey, please, don't leave me." My fingers curled around her small hand, and I felt her already cold body lose even more warmth. I had brought her back from the verge of death, only to let her die in a place of supposed healing. The irony was not lost on me. My fingers curled, nails digging into her weak skin enough to break the surface, and it did. The moment her blood seeped out of the shallow wound and touched my palm, the familiar searing pain returned. Though I hated myself for it, I reeled my hands back. Or rather, tried to. The boiling liquid latched onto my finger, connecting us via a bubbling black string. The liquid enclosed around the tip of my finger, cutting any blood flow and doing little to numb the pain. A vile crack rang out, followed by my release. Looking down at my hand, I saw more than half of the digit torn off, the ends charred as black as the flesh on her back. The lack of any burning pain was the last of my concern, as coming from Lily was a faint crunch. Then she smiled. A pure, content grin born of the innocence only a child could possess. The sight was enough to nullify the agony in my finger. I didn't realize that I too was beginning to smile, until the ends of my lips ached. "My poor baby," I cooed, hovering my hand over the wound but making sure not to make any direct contact. Her hand bulged awkwardly, unable to take the form it once had, skin barely able to hold whatever lay underneath. "You must be so hungry." Huh, it was as if she was answering me, unintelligible groans acting as her only method of communication. "Daddy will go get you some food. All right, I'll be right back." Not waiting for a response, I approached the door where a cacophony of warnings, screams, and slams pierced through the wood. Pulling a desk just the tiniest bit back, the door was finally free, just enough to allow one person to enter, which they did. The broken form of a nurse scrambled inside, bones scraping together as she tried to fit her body through the tiny gap. Before anyone else could get in, I pushed the desk back, trapping her in here with us. "Return her," she began, her voice picking up in volume as she repeated her demand. I latched a hand around her wrist, forcing her to look at Lily, something crossing the husk's eye, something none of them had yet. Fear. It wasn't the terror that was expected of a person about to meet their end. No, it was a primal, animalistic horror of being faced with the unknown, something that overcame whatever spell placed on the mob. Before she could speak again, I tossed her over my shoulder, her body hurling toward Lily. Immediately, fleshy tendrils burst out of her stomach, piercing through her and pinning her down. The nurse's eyes no longer had the dark pupils that seemed to be shared by every one of those things and regained their natural color, brown. They were barely able to widen before the tentacles ripped through the rest of her, the sharpened edges acting as blades. I couldn't bear to watch the scene any longer, returning my focus to the door. It just then hit me that the noise had stopped. I must have been so focused on Lily that I didn't notice the sound of footsteps fading away. I turned around, expecting to see the nurse's half-mangled body still being digested by Lily, only to find no trace of her, just the now crimson bedsheets, and occasional drops of blood staining the floor. Lily remained still, her lips no longer parted, and her eyes closed. Strangely enough, she didn't look like she had just eaten. There were no misplaced lumps gliding underneath her skin, or the odd sounds that had accompanied the nurse's demise, just her acne-covered face and her slightly tinted skin. Though unconscious still, I could tell the meal left her content, her writhing body coming at a still. Not that wretched stillness her body took when she was splayed across the ground, but a serene, tranquil one, with the danger of the mob now past, and no longer any obstacles standing in the way. I settled against the end of the bed, not bothering to take one of the seats placed beside the bed. As the minutes passed, however, I noticed that the light seeping into the window was gradually being blocked. I thought that perhaps it was clouds, or, God forbid, the mob returning. But when I peeked out the window, it was neither. Encasing the glass was a layer of black, the material stretching and writhing. It pulsed as if alive, and upon closer inspection, I realized it resembled the same secretion that Lily's wounds had spewed on the seat of the car. Before I could continue to observe the bizarre substance, a violent illness swept over me, my body reeling back. A surge of adrenaline, as if I was staring at death itself, hit me. My breathing became ragged, and my heart raced. My head pounded, the pain so strong I could see stars. Every attempt at looking back was met with resistance. I didn't dare fight back. Something was happening behind me, something that should remain unknown to human eyes, something that wasn't meant to exist. The feeling subsided the moment I could hear Lily's contents sigh coming from the bed, and I found myself smiling. Whatever she was going through, it was my duty as a parent to accompany her every step of the way. Despite her voice bouncing off of the increasingly fleshy walls 1,000 times, despite the light above me being overtaken by her ever-growing form, despite every nerve in my body awakening in the presence of a horror built into my very genes, I would stay. I don't think I'm leaving this room alive, that is. She has yet to awaken, and I reckon it might take a while for that. I realize that I have not only participated but actively aided in the creation of a monstrosity. It is something beyond comprehension, an abomination against nature. Yet, the more I sit here, listening to her calm breaths, the more the dread washes away, my fate becoming clear. I will see to it that she grows up, whether that entails a bright young woman or something far, far greater, I cannot say. Nor does it matter. I can hear her become restless again behind me. A growing young girl needs food, and I will more than gladly provide.